Welcome to the luncheon at the 36th Annual ITA Workshop and Meeting here in beautiful Austin, Texas. Thanks so much to each of you for making the journey to be here with us. I am Victoria Sahani, Associate Provost for Community and Inclusion at Boston University and Professor of Law at Boston University School of Law. I also have the honor of serving as Chair of the Academic Council of the Institute for Transnational Arbitration. I previously chaired the ITA Academic Council's interview project, Preserving Perspectives, International Arbitrators in Their Own Words. This project is important and wholly unique among interview projects hosted by various international arbitration organizations worldwide. We interview prominent international arbitrators and record the stories of their lives and careers as they themselves tell it. The videos of these interviews are memorialized forever on the ITA website so that future generations of international arbitration practitioners can watch and learn from them. I want to recognize the current chair of the Preserving Perspectives Project and vice chair of the Academic Council, Professor Karina Baltag, for her important work on this interview and on the series as a whole, as well as thank the members of the Preserving Perspectives Project Committee, Professor Catherine Titi and Professor Mohammed Abdel Wahab. I also wanted to thank the chair of ITA, Tom Sikora, and the ITA staff, led by T.L. Cubbage, Daria Shirkova, Aaliyah Robinson, Monica Shome, and the entire ITA team for their support and enthusiasm for the Academic Council. I would also like to thank ITA's numerous sponsors and partners for supporting today's conference. I am pleased to introduce today's interview of Jan Paulsson, an independent arbitrator and professor emeritus at the University of Miami School of Law, interviewed by Elizabeth Silbert, a partner at King & Spalding and co-head of the firm's International Disputes Practice Group, and an adjunct professor at the University of Georgia School of Law. We are tremendously grateful to Jan for having agreed to be interviewed as part of the project and to Elizabeth for agreeing to serve as his interviewer. We very much look forward to their conversation. Now, without further ado, the Academic Council of the Institute for Transnational Arbitration is very pleased to present our Preserving Perspectives Project interview of Jan Paulsson, interviewed by Elizabeth Silbert.
Thank you, Professor Sahani. Professor Paulsson, the brief of the Oral History Project is to record the evolution of modern international arbitration in the words of those who have lived it. And in preparing for today, you observed to me that there's no sense in discussing the evolution of arbitration if it doesn't prepare us for the future. And you also have decided that you do not want this interview to be a recitation of war stories. I will still ask you maybe for a few, but instead you have said that you want to focus on the reality of living in the world of arbitration today, and more importantly, where it's going. And so I thank you in advance for sharing your ideas.
Thank you, Elizabeth. First of all, great thanks to you for accepting this role today, and I thank you all for being here with us today. I want to start with an apology. I see a room filled with experts in the field of arbitration who are having, I have no doubt, scintillating discussions already. And here I am interrupting you and saying, please be quiet, and I'm going to be interviewed for the next 40 minutes. I don't know who put me up to this. And I think I remember what my mother told me when I was a little child. I'm translating, of course. She said, why can't you stop saying yes to people? And here I am, repentant, contrite, apologetic, interrupting your scintillating discussions, and we'll see where we go. I traveled from Bahrain yesterday, nonstop, so it was quite a long flight, but it was comfortable. Nevertheless, there's this noise in the air, and so when I alighted here, I decided it would be a good idea to restore myself with a glass of red wine. And I forgot the paradox of claret. You familiar with the paradox of claret? No. Claret does not produce clarity. And that got me thinking about irrelevant things like paradoxes. we thought about the paradox of hatred. Hatred is a feeling which is elicited only by the truly popular people. And that paradox has a sibling paradox, envy. Envy is a barrage of malice to which we all hope that we will be subjected. So these are the things that happen when you have claret, thereby proving my point. I'm not sure you like paradoxes very much, but I'll give you one more since I'm off on my claret. James Bond. What is the paradox of James Bond? The paradox of James Bond has to do with the three ways in which he can be described. Serial killer, alcoholic, role model. Let's get back to arbitration.
Okay, good. All right, we'll break the ice with just a couple quick questions before we delve into substance while people are getting their coffees. Tell me, as a true world traveler, the remotest, most exotic location you have been for a case.
I'll give you three. The first was in '79. I was 29 at the time, an associate with a law firm in Paris. I went to N'Djamena. N'Djamena is the capital of Chad, and Chad had found a bit of oil, but it was not a very good quality, and it's far from ports. So there was a bit of a discussion with Cameroon about how to possibly get this oil through Cameroon to the sea to some port. Still hasn't been done after all these years. But that was N'Djamena. And if you want to take a little excursion from N'Djamena, you can go out. It's a very, very large country, very unpopulated, and if you drive for 5,000 miles or so, you'll get to the Mediterranean, and if you break down on the way, it's very dangerous. So it was a very, very foolish thing to drive around there. The second one, the Jamuna River. Anybody know the Jamuna River? It's the largest river of Bangladesh, and it separates northwestern Bangladesh, which has a lot of agricultural production, from the southeast, which is where the capital city and the leading port of Bangladesh are. Since they grow a lot of stuff up there, it is very disturbing to have the Jamuna River going in between these two halves of Bangladesh, and all the more so as the Jamuna River is on a plain. So there was a large construction project called river training. You know what river training is? It's training a river. Disobedient rivers that go all over the place when there's a monsoon have to be steered into channels and so forth. So we went to the Jamuna River and looked at how that river could be trained. On the way, I discovered Bangladesh, I'm sure we all know, is one of the most densely populated country in the world. But when you drive through the Bangladeshi jungles, it looks all like jungle. Very green, very lush, until you stop. And immediately you'll be surrounded by all sorts of people that come from the jungle. And they sang songs and they recited poetry. And there was a Bangladeshi official there who I asked him, what are these people singing songs and poetry? What are they saying? He said, they are reciting Tagore, the love Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel Prize winner? He says, yes. He's a Bengali. I said, but he's not a Muslim. He said, no, it's the poetry. It's the love. Go anywhere in Bangladesh and you will hear people reciting Tagore. So that was a moving experience. The third one I'll give you is the line of control. Line of control? That's the line that separates in the Himalayas, Pakistan from India. And I sat on a tribunal once, chaired by Stephen Schwabel, to a dispute about the control of the rivers that run from the Indian part of the Himalayas down to the waiting farmers of Pakistan who need these rivers to continue flowing in times of lesser flow. And for 2.5 days, we went up into the Himalayas in Pakistani helicopters. And on the 2.5 days, or noon on that day, we were taken by elements of the Pakistani army to the bridge that crosses the line of control. And we're the only people, except people who can prove that they have a residence in Kashmir, who are actually allowed to go across the middle of that bridge, where we were met by the Indian army officials who took us down to the other side, and then in an Indian helicopter down into Kathmandu. So that was the third one, and there are others, but some are indelible.
Thank you. All right, so let's go back to evolution of arbitration. So let's take a quick trip down memory lane when you started. What was the arbitration environment like in 1975? We'll start there.
I think it's important to remember, I came out of law school in 75, had no idea that there was such a thing as practicing in the field of arbitration. It just could be something that you might do from time to time. In Paris in 1975, that's when I started. It was a very different world. It was professional negligence to stipulate a seat of arbitration in London in 1975 because of the case stated method rule, which held that errors in the arbitration award could be appealed. And that was reformed in 79. That's a fairly big change. In France in 1975, foreigners could not be advocates, could not go to court, so they could be legal advisors, conseil juridique. French lawyers tended not to speak any English whatsoever. Arbitration was something that happened from time to time. There were a couple of law firms in Paris that did a smattering of arbitration. Coudert Frere, where I was, and Archibald's. Those were the ones who were sort of known to do a fair amount, but nobody really full-time, no teams of people full-time in arbitration. If you look over at Germany, in Germany there wasn't even a national bar. Lawyers in Germany were regulated province by province, so there weren't even national German law firms. It's a very, very different environment, and it's astonishing how quickly things started to change in the years following that.
All right, so let's talk about your first client that came around that time. So you're sitting in your office as a recent law graduate in Paris, receiving a call from your very first client. And could you tell us, first of all, who referred your first client to you?
Well, my client, I had no idea what a client was. This was 1978, so I was by then 28 years old. And I was sitting in my tiny office on the Champs-Élysées, having just read in the International Herald Tribune, as it was then called, that there was this exciting case involving foreign investors who had entered into a contract with the government of Egypt to create a destination resort surrounding the pyramids. And that this was part of President Sadat's new open door policy to investment, and he had approved it, but now there was a ruckus in the Egyptian parliament and the project was going to be canceled, and it was just going to lead to an arbitration. I'd done a couple of arbitrations, so I'm reading this. Well, that's very exciting. I wonder how anybody could handle some kind of a case like that. And I had no idea that I could ever have a client, ever. So the phone rings. And you said my first client calls. It's a person calling who introduces himself as a lawyer with a company called SPP, which was the company that had entered into this contract, which is dominated by a couple of people named Peter Monk and David Gilmore, who later founded the Barrick gold company, well known in Canada. Anyway, I had read about this thing in the newspaper, and he said, I'm the head lawyer for SPP, and we have a problem with Egypt. And I said, I just read about it in the newspaper. He said, well, good. I'm looking for a lawyer to do this arbitration, and I'm asking around Europe. And a professor at Boston University gave me your name. His name is Rusty Park. And I thought I'd call you, and maybe I can come and see you. I'm traveling from Toronto. I said, okay, yes, great. And he told me that he was seeing some other people, and I can't remember anybody except one of the other candidates for this job was Pierre Lalive, my idol, a great man of international arbitration. What in the world am I doing being spoken about in the same sentence as him? But this it turned out to be that he wasn't much older than I, had never done any case involving an international law. And he talked to me a little bit, and the conversation wasn't that long because I told him absolutely everything I knew about international law, and I knew a lot about Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 is very simple, and he understood that, and I can only guess that when he met Professor Lalive and perhaps all of the other ones, they were just a little bit too sophisticated in terms of all the possibilities and so forth, that he had a hard time reporting, and he felt that this was a good thing. So ultimately, he agreed to hire me to do this case. I wasn't the partner, so I asked for permission to my supervising partner, who was Laurie Craig, and he says, "Well, you got it. Go with it." So, well, what do I do now? He said, "Well, just meet the fellow and put up a plan. You've done a couple of little arbitrations." So I said, "Can I take him to a restaurant?" He said, "Yes, yes." No, he said, "Here, just use this credit card." And so I asked around what would be a fancy restaurant. Now, this is where I remember this with great embarrassment. I took him to a very fancy restaurant where I had never been. Somebody told me, "You can go to this place." And we came to this restaurant, and he was very impressed with the elegance of this place, and so was I. And I walked in feeling very abashed, not knowing quite what you do in these circumstances, and you're the host, and there's only two of us. But there I looked across the room, and there was somebody I knew. And I immediately rushed toward this person with my hand over, and I said, "Bonjour, monsieur." And as I was walking, I realized the person I had recognized was Maurice Coudert, foreign minister and prime minister under Charles de Gaulle. I didn't know him at all. I just recognized him, and I saw this face. Well, he's a politician. And he sees somebody who's dressed in a suit coming at him saying, "Bonjour, monsieur." What's the politician going to do? The instincts of his entire career said, "Bonjour, monsieur, comment ça va?" And so I smiled at him and I said, thinking relatively quickly for a Swede, said, "I really enjoyed the interview you gave last week, and congratulations for that." I thought he must have given an interview. He gives it all the time. He said, "Merci beaucoup." And I walked to the waiter then took us to our table, hurried us away from this august gathering of very eminent people. And I sat down, and my new client-to-be said, "Wasn't that the Prime Minister of France?" I said, "Yes, I think he comes here quite often." So that was the beginning of the SPP case, and it just shows that sometimes you just have to roll with the events as they unfurl and keep a straight face.
Yeah, it's a good lesson in client development. I like it. Okay, so you go forward with SPP. You have an ICC arbitration against Egypt. You win. You actually get a very groundbreaking, interesting award against the government of Egypt, which is then promptly set aside by the Paris courts. So you have a major win and then a major loss for your first client. What did you do?
I cried a bit.
Mm.
It's a great disappointment. I don't think it was a groundbreaking award, except for the fact that the tribunal found majority decision that in signing the agreement, the Minister of Tourism had agreed, approved, and ratified the agreement on behalf of the government, and this was irreversible. The Paris Court of Appeal found that the words in English, agreed, approved, and ratified, translated into the mind of the French Court of Appeal, didn't quite mean that in the full scope, and on that basis they thought that a state could not be held to an agreement ratifying the basic, fuller agreement signed by a sub-entity of the Egyptian state. Anyway, that was the end of that story. And there you see desperation can provide fuel.
Inspiration. Yeah.
Desperation can provide. That's a very good way to put it. Yes,
Yeah,
good.
okay. So then we have the ICSID case that you ended up filing, which led to a very significant jurisdictional decision in 1988 that I think it's fair to say is seminal. Can we agree?
Well, think about the case. Now we get into something which is quite serious and I think of importance to everybody in this room. The question is, can you hold a state to an agreement which is expressed unilaterally, which is then becomes mutual simply by this subsequent acceptance of the respondent state? Can a claimant do that? Claimant which has never entered maybe into, if it's a treaty-based arbitration or if it's a If it's grounded in an investment law proclaimed by the parliament under those two circumstances, can that bind a government which isn't even aware of that particular investor? Unlike the case here, where obviously the government knew about SPP but thought that it had won the ICC arbitration, which was now gone. So the question then arises: that was, without this case, if it had gone the other way, the entire world would be different, I promise you. And I'll make good on that proposition by calling your attention to this. The tribunal that was set up for that case. So this is an agreement in the Investment Code of Egypt, saying any investor who qualifies, nobody's named, no investor is named, any investor who is qualified under the Egyptian law and has been approved may bring an arbitration under the ICSID rules. That had never been tried before, and there had never been an investment treaty arbitration yet. So this was before all of this. I went to my supervising partner, as I should, and said, well, I want to try this. He said, okay, you still are smarting over your defeat in the ICC. What is this you're talking about? It's been held that the government of Egypt didn't agree. I said, yes, they didn't agree in that contract, but they agreed in a law. I said, but your client had nothing to do with the law. It doesn't matter. Well, I've never heard of that. So maybe you haven't heard of that, but read this treaty. He said. So finally, being the wonderful person he was, you want to try it, try it. I don't see why you won't. If the client goes along with it, let's go. So that was a tribunal presided by Eduardo Jimenez de Rechiga, former president of the International Court of Justice, public international law, former minister of about everything there is in Uruguay, and a Latin American. Latin America, in the negotiations of the ICSID Treaty, had delivered what was called the No of Tokyo, because there were meetings to discuss the ICSID Convention in various countries around the world. And the meeting in Tokyo, the Latin American delegations together said, no, we don't want this thing called ICSID. That changed later on. Royal discussion about jurisdiction before this tribunal presided by Jimenez de Rechiga. Egypt had named the counselor at the Administrative Court of Egypt, and I cheekily had to demand that Egypt waive any possible future objection or attempt to annul the award on the basis that the designation of an Egyptian national had been contrary to the agreement of the parties. And the Egyptian found it very cheeky. I said, well, if you did it, so you have to agree, or you change this nomination. There was an American arbitrator named by SPP. This argument is not a long argument to have. Go through it for a couple of days, because it's an important question, but it's not. There's a limit to how much you can talk about this article in the Egyptian investment law. The arbitrators went away, and for the better part of a year, we heard nothing about it. That tells you what? This was not an easy decision. And the decision came down. Finally, I have a feeling that there must have been some wavering and soul-searching, and finally the decision was made that this is a way, as contemplated in the very ICSID Convention itself, which talks about treaties and investment laws, for a state to express its agreement. And hence, jurisdiction was upheld. And I submit that, particularly given the personage of the president of this particular tribunal, it was extremely important to all the rest that we have seen in the years following it.
And so this decision, which accepted this concept of an open offer of arbitration that could be accepted by any number of anonymous investors, you explored this very famously in this article that's been oft quoted and oft imitated, Arbitration Without Privity, which you published in 1995. But you put in the end of that article a note of caution that you have said you think is often overlooked. And so with the sort of boom of investor-state arbitration that was occasioned by SPP and other decisions and how much it has been used, and knowing what you have said about arbitration without privity, I'd like to read very quickly for you what you wrote and then hear your comment on it and maybe where we are today with this note of caution. You wrote in that article, indeed the closing words, arbitration without privity is a delicate mechanism. a single incident of an adventurous arbitrator going beyond the proper scope of his jurisdiction in a sensitive case may be sufficient to generate backlash. But if the mechanism is applied judiciously, it will help fill a void that now exists in the absence of compulsory jurisdiction and thus contribute to enhancing the legal security of international economic life. Where do you think we are today with that warning, and what might be done transformatively to improve or create new developments to deal with that note of caution?
I don't think my opinion is better than anybody else's. I will only say that sometimes I wish maybe that article is too long. I wish people would read to the end. Because the first page is described what is this mechanism, and it does create this opportunity, and I explained why it was a reality, and the initial decisions were correct in terms of founding jurisdiction. But what is given can be taken away, and if something is perceived, perception is sometimes more important than anything else, is perceived as overreaching or illegitimate or whatever it was, there is ultimately a political foundation that must be maintained. And on that basis, you can all have your own opinion about these warning words, but forgetting about it is something that can be only done at our peril. And the many people who do represent states, which at one point in my career was about half of my cases involving investor-state arbitrations, will certainly never forget it. So I really don't have any comment beyond that. It's a delicate mechanism.
So do you have any thoughts, sort of sitting here today in 2024, about developments that might improve or help shore up existing procedures to protect this delicate mechanism so that we don't lose it to history?
Well, you have to look at what happens in cases on a case-by-case basis. Some states have very little idea what hits them when one of these claims is being made. This magnitude of the claims are sometimes driven very high. States have difficulty in reacting to it. And I think that is something that it's necessary to remember, that this does not arise from a contractual relationship. This arises from a gift that was given in a matter of self-interest to attract investments and so forth. But nevertheless, something that is given can also be taken away. And I think sometimes that is forgotten by some adventurist claims, which don't assist in the others.
Okay. All right, we're going to touch on one more warning bell, I think, before we move to the future. So you have also spoken on and written repeatedly on this concept of essentially arbitration as free choice. The concept of the freedom of parties to be able to choose a selected wise person to decide their dispute, and how important that freedom is, and it is to protect that. And one of the things that you posited in a speech that was called Enclaves of Justice, and again, just to quote you and to get your thoughts on it today, you said, quote, "The error is to think injustice is abnormal. It may be more realistic to think and act on the assumption that justice is a surprising anomaly." And of course, this was inspired, as you have explained to me, actually by comments that were made by the chief economist of the IMF, Raghuram Rajan of India, who was later a professor at University of Chicago, and then the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and quite a strong comment to be made by, again, someone who is the chief economist of the IMF, to think, essentially, assume injustice and create enclaves of justice that can create light and the shadows. And you have taken that a bit further and said there is this essentially fraudulent consensus on the rule of law, that generally the world and its courts and its systems respect the rule of law, and there are a few anomalies that, in fact, maybe we should think about it the other way around and create enclaves in arbitration, maybe one small way to do it or a big way to do it. And that's, hearing that, it's pretty tough stuff. This is a room of people that care deeply about justice. What are your thoughts about that? And where are we on this continuum of this concept of, do you think the default is still injustice and we should think about it this way, or are we moving in a different way today?
It depends on where you look in the world. I think the important thing is just to think about what Rajan said. I was startled by it, and all the more so as this was not a lawyer speaking. As at the time he was at the IMF and the World Bank have spent hundreds of millions of dollars shoring up the rule of law everywhere. And here is someone saying, we're wasting our time. We are assuming, we presume that everyone wants the rule of law everywhere. And that simply is belied by the facts. We don't see it. We see states where corruption is rife, sometimes quite developed states, where politics gets the upper hand, and we are assuming something at our peril. Perhaps we would do better by creating what he called enclaves of justice, and perhaps they will grow. An interesting idea, which I hadn't thought of at the time, coming from somebody, again, not a lawyer, but somebody who is very concerned about the flux of money in the world, the creation of wealth and the transmission of wealth to be used in the processes of development that help humanity survive in all the countries of the world. And it occurred to me that was something to be remembered and something to think about as we go about our business, and perhaps look at the things that we are doing and ask ourselves, is this contributing, at least in this little corner, to mutual respect for the rule of law, or does it do the opposite?
All right, so just to close with some talk about the future, we've talked a little bit about what can arbitration do to protect itself. And we've talked, I think, really about three things, or you and I have talked in preparing for this, about three things that you see that could potentially go wrong, that arbitration could, if it doesn't keep its eye on the ball, we could lose this special system that has created enclaves of justice. And those three things we've talked about are really costs, competition of procedures that may offer what users need, and diversity. Perhaps in a different way than we often hear it spoken about. Can you speak for just a minute about what your concern is about spiraling costs in arbitration, and what you see as the sort of biggest issue there and what we might do?
Maybe the big issue is IT. I don't know. When I started working in the field of arbitration, as I said, there weren't large teams of lawyers working on it. I was doing arbitrations now and then when there was an arbitration that came in through the door. And that was the case with Laurie Craig as well. And there wasn't a fixed team working on arbitrations. A $1 million case would be in a big arbitration. I'm not talking about the cost of the lawyers. That's the stake of the arbitration. Now we have gone to a completely different dimension in terms of that. Now, one thing has, just mention a detail of the kinds of things that I view as dangerous and productive of the immense costs, which are intolerable to lots of parts of the globe if we want to reach them and have them accept the processes. It has to do with IT. We would write memorials way back then in the day. They would be 30 pages long. If you wanted to correct it, you actually had to save the paper, and sort of make the correction on that paper. We had manual typewriters. And then remember when the fax came, it's a miracle. It can never get better than this. And then the BlackBerry came, and I fell in love with the BlackBerry. And now I'm sure we can't possibly go further than where we are now. Cut and paste. Those 30-page memorials, which I could read back to you pretty much word by word, and so could my supervising partner. We slaved over those words and the expressions, and everything was just right, what you need to say, and nothing more, and everything cogent. Didn't cost that much. And everything was read by the arbitrators, I'm sure. Where are we now? We have to be very careful of the award factories. What do you think if you have a boutique of a few partners who declare that they're going to sacrifice themselves and become 100% arbitrators, and they have 10 associates? What in the world are the 10 associates doing? Well, this is an expensive operation, and what they are doing is 30 pages becomes 300 pages. And there's citation of precedents. And leave no one out, no matter how marginally relevant, because somebody could point out that you missed that one, and you're a first-year associate or a third-year associate, I don't care, working in the library, you want to show that you didn't miss a single thing. Arbitrators going to read this? You think so? Are they paid to read 300 pages and really to think it through? I think this has spiraled to a point where nobody anymore can really realistically think that international arbitration serves claims that people really care about that only involve a couple of $million. Anybody read GAR yesterday? Kosovo won an arbitration award. Kosovo. A distributor sued Kosovo for unpaid fees. Kosovo denied owing the fees and said to the contrary, we signed a contract with you, which was a partnership agreement. As time went along, we amended it several times, but now we've looked at the people who agreed to those amendments. They're contrary to the law. And so therefore, not only don't we owe you the money, which you are demanding on the basis of higher royalties, while we were paying the higher royalties due to the amendments, we want that to be paid back. All of that was filed in 2022. Arbitration in Switzerland. I don't know the nationality of the claimant. Claimant loses, the state wins. I think if I've understood it correctly, the account is from yesterday in GAR, it's about €1.5 million by a sole arbitrator, rendered in 2023. Upheld against a challenge to the Swiss Supreme Court, reported yesterday. That's arbitration at work. Anybody here want to do cases like that? What does that sound like? $1.5 million? That's peanuts for legal costs in the case. So we're just going to write off, and those cases aren't going to, who's going to handle them, and is it going to work? It's very important that those kinds of cases work. I think we also need to rethink the way cases are presented, because there is a huge amount of inefficiency, and I'm probably wrong in this as on many things, but I don't understand how it's tolerated.
All right, so let's close on one last point. You've raised this question about arbitration being open to economic diversity, essentially, that you should be able to use arbitration for $1 million dispute as much as a $100 million dispute. One more point about essentially being open to diversity of cultures, not just diversity of individuals, but truly making arbitration diverse and open to various legal cultures and opening up the doors of sort of the Western hold on it. If you could close maybe with your comments about what we might do to help safeguard arbitration for the future in that sense.
I don't think this will be controversial, and I believe and I hope that everybody in the room will be very sympathetic to what I say, even though I'll start off with some overblown rhetoric, perhaps. I think many in the West don't have an idea of the degree of resentment felt in other parts of the world about the process of arbitration, which is dominated by Western actors who control the arbitration and who impose certain ways of doing it. This is a matter of development, and I think we all need to understand that. That is something which is reparable. It is being repaired, and we should all encourage it. So forget the first sentence I said. I think it's a reality, but it's not something I'm that worried about it. But I'm observing what this means. What happens? We have today, it's not surprising It's not surprising at all. Just like the law firms in France, which once upon a time weren't even avocats, which had to be legal advisors in some inferior status and were populated by foreigners. France opens its doors to international law firms. All kinds of Americans, English firms exist in England. Who are the lawyers in these firms? French. Oh, how about the partners who really run the thing, like the senior guy? French. They're not crazy. This is the person who would discuss things with the administration and so forth. So this has been the channel of the new population. That's the model. So it's not surprising we see gifted African lawyers working in Western law firms. Even more gifted lawyers from Arab countries working in Western law firms that want to penetrate the Arab market. The next step has to be they are entitled to dominate the law firms in which they work and which they want to firm. Anybody against that? You can't be against that. It's a very important development, and we have to support it. Where I live now in Bahrain, I'm observing and very much supporting one development. Bahrain has become a bilingual jurisdiction. A bilingual jurisdiction. Not an enclave of 1 square mile where you can have international arbitration in English, but no matter what the outcome is, any annulment applications will then turn into Arabic in the local courts and you can't use your lawyers, etc., etc. Now, you start off with a contract in English. Sometimes I think the Bahrainis went too far. Even between two Bahrainis, they've signed a contract in English. It is presumed, unless they want to agree otherwise. And some people say even they can't agree otherwise. I disagree with it. I say unless they agree otherwise, but that's not been resolved yet. Contract in English. The dispute will be heard in English. The appeal will be heard in English. There's only one level of appeal to the Court of Cassation. That's why you have individuals like myself who sit on the Court of Cassation in Bahrain, and I don't work in Arabic. I sit there. A couple of weeks ago, I sat in a formation of 3. The other 2, I think you'll find it interesting, the other 2 were Arabs. One is a woman, works in Riyadh, partner in Freshfields. Any loss in quality or understanding of the arbitral process? I don't think so. The third judge on that case, I hope I didn't say arbitrator because now we're talking about court actions. The third judge, his name was just mentioned, Abdul Rauf, Egyptian. The month before that, again, I sat with a Lebanese woman who lives in Abu Dhabi, who spent 10 years doing corporate finance in Sherman and Sterling in New York. No particular issues of quality and experience and a breadth of experience which you want. Again, third arbitrator, an Egyptian who for a long time, many of you know him, ran the arbitration center in Cairo, which has a good reputation, and somebody who knows arbitration very well. That's the way we have to go.
Thank you. Super informative. I agree with you. Thanks to everyone. Thank you, Professor Paulsson, for your thoughts.